when a woman is going through or like looks or contemplates a donor, it's not a conversation that you'd want to have. It's like you don't idealize that, right? I mean, nobody even wants to go to a fertility clinic, period. You just want to be having a baby or creating a baby in the bedroom.
Oh yeah,
or kitchen
100%.
Or on holiday, whatever, right?
Yeah,
but
in a kitchen for sure.
Kitchen counter, whatever.
Today we have special guest for me, especially because she helped me conceive my babies. Dr. Belej-Rak is an obstetrician gynecologist with specialty training in fertility. She is wonderful. And the reason why I sought her out, she's very holistic. And I remember seeing and sitting in her office and thinking, okay, first of all, this place is outstanding, gorgeous. And I heard later that she was part of the design. So she just wants you to make you feel relaxed when you show up to her office. And then just seeing her credentials on the wall that she had neuro-linguistic programming, which is, she really cares about the whole mind-body picture when you're trying to get pregnant. So Dr. Belej-Rak, welcome. You are awesome. And I'm so happy that you could be here today to talk about egg donation.
Thank you for having me.
So egg donation is actually, maybe we'll talk about what that even means. But for me, I guess, to me, it means like a way of, it's like if you're on a journey and you're struggling to conceive and, you're dealing with egg quality issues for various reasons, then you can still have your own baby. Perhaps you're using your partner's sperm. And what I love about it, and I read along the way because I thought maybe that might be an option that I had to go through, was that there's this whole concept of epigenetics. So if you could explain what egg donation is and talk about epigenetics as a starting point, that'd be amazing.
Sure. So unlike men make sperm every 3 months from puberty until into old age. Women are born with a set number of eggs. And so we are exposed to toxins, heat, radiation, chemicals throughout our lifetime. And eventually we run out of those eggs. That's when we become menopausal. For some women, that can happen earlier in their life rather than later. And that would then not allow them to have their own baby because they've run out of eggs for various reasons. Either genetically they've run out of them, or perhaps they had chemotherapy or some radiation or surgery that may have depleted their ovarian reserve. And in cases like that, what we can do is we can use an egg from a younger woman, still use the partner's sperm, create the embryo, and then the woman who's run out of the eggs can still carry the pregnancy and have a baby that's at least partially genetically related to her partner. In recent years, they've discovered that even though the chromosomes or the genes are not from that woman, while that baby is growing in her body, there are what are called epigenetic changes that can take place. And so what that means is that it can affect how the gene will function once the baby is born. So essentially there is what's imprinting or some of the mom's characteristics that will come out in the baby. So there is a genetic connection between the baby and the mom who is carrying it.
Which is so amazing. And if I may add in, there's also, when they're talking about as you're carrying the baby, there's this exchange where the cells from the baby migrates into the woman's tissue. So there's literally a biological connection. And so I loved hearing that because, and there's even a theory, it's like, okay, some of these cells from the baby that migrates to the tissues of the mother is like where it's necessary. And it's like, it's helping mommy heal itself as well. So I thought that was fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Totally. And Mary, can you share your story a little bit so that viewers are aware? I know that you only started sharing this recently. This is a big deal. So can you share again about your story, and then we'll ask, more questions.
So I was not prepared to share immediately. I was going to let the conversation flow and with the information first, but
sure.
Let's be real. Like when a woman is going through or like looks or contemplates a donor, it's not it's not a conversation that you'd want to have. It's like you don't idealize that, right? I mean, nobody even wants to go to a fertility clinic, period. You just want to be having a baby or creating a baby in the bedroom.
Oh yeah,
or kitchen
100%.
or on holiday, whatever, right?
Yeah,
but
in a kitchen for sure.
Kitchen counter, whatever. But and
spontaneous is the key, exactly. Right? Like this like the last place you want to go to is a fertility clinic. And you're just not thinking that it rocks your womanhood. You don't think that you need to be going to a fertility clinic, and then you're going through this whole process of thinking as you're going through it. Now what? What's next? I'm not getting pregnant, right?
So okay, so because you brought it up, we wanted to talk more about donor. I guess we can do it in that fashion then, my personal story. So for those of you who read my book, Pathways to Pregnancy, I speak to my story. It's 15 stories of hope, one of which is my own. And in that story, I describe how, being a natural, a person
healthcare provider.
Well, yes, a natural healthcare provider who, never has taken an aspirin in my life because I just don't need it. I'm so healthy, la, la, la. But then at 38, trying to conceive with my husband, we weren't getting pregnant. And by the time I was 40, we found out that I had bilateral hydrosalpinx, which is meaning that my fallopian tubes were blocked as well as fluid filled. So blockage means egg and sperm can never meet. And the fluid filled means that perhaps there's a theory that it could be a noxious, toxic fluid that can impede implantation. If you have anything to add about that, you can send to Maya.
That's perfect.
Right. So then I had to sit back and go, oh my gosh, unfortunately, I'm just human, and I'm not above it all. And meaning, as much as I had wanted a child naturally, there's just no way. There's no possibility. So to sit with that was very, very difficult. But yet, coming from a place of perseverance and looking at what I really want in my life and future life, I just thought, you know what, having a child is non-negotiable. So I'll do whatever it takes. And I never knew I had that in me, because it was like the conversation initially was, it's all natural or nothing. And then, back in the day when people did surgeries before IVF, like I did one surgery. I did an IVF thinking, and I was 40 at the time, and it didn't work out. And I thought, crap, I don't have time to waste. So I think I have to, by the way, I did acupuncture and herbal medicine to try to clear the tubes, which after 6 months, I'm like, oh my gosh, the hydrosalpinx, it looked as though it was, completely back to normal, like in terms of there was no swelling. So I thought, let's try IVF. Maybe we did something. So we did. And as soon as I started the drugs, unfortunately, I saw that my fallopian tubes were like blown up again. I thought, crap. So we did a fresh transfer back in the day when there was a fresh transfer, and it didn't work for many obvious reasons. And I thought, gosh, I am 40, I don't have time to waste, so I better get on with it. So I elected surgery. So they took out both tubes, in which case 100%, there's no way in hell I could just relax, go to a hotel and go on holiday and get pregnant. Right. So then it became, gosh, let's do another IVF. And very interestingly, when I did that second round of IVF, the numbers, the antral follicle count went down by 80%. So that's interesting, because I'm like, surely it can't be just my age itself. And what I see now in recent years is that they tend towards doing surgeries after embryo retrievals or egg retrievals, and they may do some batching before they go on to surgery. So I didn't have that. And so we did a multiple, so that time they were able to retrieve one egg. I had one embryo, I got pregnant, and I miscarried. So it's like, crap. It's like, it can work. Both my grandmothers were 46 having babies naturally. but I can't. I have to do IVF. So I'm not stupid. I know the odds. Like, how many times can I do this without, putting my hands up in the air and giving up, right? And again, I was like, having a kid was non-negotiable. So I had to start looking at ways of having a baby. So we continued IVF, but then I looked at adoption. And we went through the whole social worker bit. We went to PRIDE program. It took us a year. And then by the time we got to China, the Chinese adoption agency, they changed their ways of doing it. And instead of like 2 years, they said, now you have 7 to 10 years to wait for a baby. So when my IVF failed, when my fourth IVF failed, I'm like, crap. So, we did the adoption and then we went back to IVF. I said, you know what, this is the last time, because like running out of money and time and resources and emotional and physical well-being, right? So we did our last IVF, and as a discussion, I said to my husband, like, listen, if we were willing to do adoption, which again, it was totally never in the cards for me, what's stopping me from looking at a super crazy early adoption of an egg? And so that's how I wound up down that road. And I'm really, so in my book, I called it my triple pronged approach. But what people don't know is that from my book, it's ambiguous, was Zoe conceived via donor or via my own egg? And, I'm coming out today telling you that it was donor conceived. And that's because to me, it's not only my story, but it's the story of my daughter, and she's now 10 and old enough to understand. And so so my privacy was not a place of coming from shame, but it's coming out of respect and love for my daughter, and also for my mother, because I held it back from her for 8 years. And I meant to tell her when she was 8 years old. And it didn't happen because of COVID.
Right.
And so in the end, we told her. And from that, it's like, okay, now I can actually come out. I'm coming out, guys.
Thank you, Mary, for sharing. I didn't know all the details because I never wanted to pry. So thank you so much for sharing the details. And Dr. Belej-Rak, I'm sure you see these stories a lot where it's this huge process of, it's not like you jump into fertility, the fertility world and say, okay, I'm going to choose I want an egg donor. So can you tell us any story at the top of mind that you can think of?
So it's variable. I mean, no one in their life ever imagines that they're going to need fertility treatment ever. I mean, I find that we hear so much about cancer and other illnesses that we kind of conceptualize that perhaps one time in our lifetime we will have either cancer or this or that, but never infertility. I don't think anybody ever even thinks that they're ever going to have trouble getting pregnant. And I think it's because in high school we're pumped with do not get pregnant information and techniques. And so finally, when it's time, it's not even a flutter of a thought. And so it has been like the diagnosis, never mind of needing an egg donor, but just infertility has been linked in terms of stress level, similar to having been diagnosed with cancer. So already it's a very, very difficult diagnosis to endure. And so in certain cases, it's quite clear that a woman might need an egg donor. So for example, women with premature ovarian insufficiency, where, they come to us already in their maybe mid-20s, having lost their periods, and based on blood work and imaging, we can tell her that it's unlikely that she may conceive with her own eggs. But even with that condition, there is a 10% lifetime kind of chance that she may at some point release an egg. However, 90% means that she's going to need some help. So that's a kind of direct way where we know already that someone might need an egg donor.
What percentage of patients do you see that have that kind of challenge?
Not much. Maybe 1%. It's not common. No. And then the other way we can find out is, for example, if someone is having trouble getting pregnant, and then we do IVF for them. So I'm thinking of one particular patient at this time. We did 3 rounds of IVF for her. And the first time they commented on the egg quality, that it was poor, and that the eggs didn't look very healthy. So we changed the protocol. We did some different things. She did vitamins and herbs and acupuncture to try to improve her egg quality. So we did a second cycle, but the same thing transpired, and then a third cycle. And so after the third cycle, she was then convinced and ready enough to kind of consider other options. And one of them was using an egg from another woman. And she did get pregnant with that transfer. So that was another way that we can identify the need for an egg donor. And some women will go for it right after one cycle of seeing that her eggs might not be good enough. And then there's other situations where, for example, we can kind of already see that the woman is running out of eggs by what's called an FSH, follicle stimulating hormone level, that could be elevated. Usually for starting IVF, we like to see it at less than 15. So if a woman is already presenting with an FSH of 40, and maybe irregular periods and a very low antral follicle count, those are signs that our medications would not work to allow her body to create extra eggs, because she is running out of them. So that's another situation where we might suggest that she consider using an egg donor.
And so, again, always sensitive to the women on their side receiving this information. And, we say all this with a grain of salt, where, even though from a medical workup point of view, it may point to, oh gosh, you may benefit from egg donation. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's impossible to have a genetic baby, right, of your own, because haven't we all seen it where, in fact, I had a patient I saw yesterday who did do egg donation, and then afterwards, a year later, she conceived naturally and has a lovely, healthy baby girl, right? And this does happen. So it's not never, but of course, it certainly enhances the chances. And as you pointed to, Dr. Belej-Rak, that when you're have the diminished ovarian reserve and your hormones aren't quite working the way they would like to for fertility treatment purposes, then IVF just may not be the thing of choice for you, right? And hence the donor egg donation will work so much better. So speaking to egg donation, actually, there's different ways of going about that pathway. So we know that people do egg donation where there's egg banking. So these are already pre-harvested eggs from a young lady that is literally sitting there in a bank for you to choose, versus egg donation with a fresh cycle where you choose the donor and the donor will do that cycle. Can you speak to maybe the benefits of each, or the pros and cons of each, and what do you see more at the clinic?
So it depends on the clinic. Some clinics work with frozen egg banks and some don't. There is a little bit of technical issues sometimes with transporting frozen eggs. They are quite fragile, more fragile than embryos. So we did have a situation one time where they were transporting the eggs, and unfortunately, they thawed before they arrived at the clinic. So that was not a nice scenario. However, obviously, it happens very infrequently, but at the same time, it can happen. So, but the benefit of using eggs that are already frozen is that they're there. So you can order them, you can choose the donor and have the eggs shipped to your clinic. So there is no, other than the time choosing the donor, you know that the eggs are there and then they're shipped. Versus
you should ship yourself. You should go to the clinic.
Right. Or go to the clinic where they're frozen.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. The other way is if you're choosing a donor to have fresh eggs retrieved, then it may take time to get that donor ready for the retrieval process. Sometimes a cycle can get canceled either she over responds or under responds, or she has, for example, an ovarian cyst, like a fluid filled sac in her ovary that prevents her from starting the cycle, or in her natural cycle, she ovulates late or early. So the timing of using a donor to get a fresh egg can be a bit more challenging.
Right. And I've noticed because of the pandemic, the actual donors that are supposed to go to cycles, there's fear around it. So then there's canceled cycles because they spontaneously cancel. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't even want to go to a clinic. Right. And meanwhile, so the length of time, the process is so much greater, I find now. Do you see that yourself?
Yes and no. I mean, we did slow down during the pandemic. Even the one of the international agencies that I work with, where they find our patients a donor around the world. We ship them the sperm, they create the embryo abroad, and then they ship us the embryos. So during the pandemic, we had delays of these embryos being shipped back due to regulations and different factors that countries implemented in terms of the pandemic.
Well, let's speak to this because you have frozen egg versus frozen embryo.
Yes.
So do you have an opinion about what are the chances? Like, would you have a greater chance of a pregnancy, a live birth through a fresh egg than being fertilized versus a frozen egg having to be thawed out, then get fertilized, the whole process?
The pregnancy rates are the same. So the efficiency of egg freezing and thawing is comparable to embryos now because we use vitrification. So
That's
it's a very quick freezing process where they kind of go into this liquid glass state very quickly. So we have as high success rates with fresh eggs, fresh embryos, and frozen embryos. So
do you have that in your clinic as proof, as data, like equal live births between the two?
Well, at my clinic, we don't use frozen eggs. So, but we do use like patients' own frozen eggs and are thawed, but we don't import frozen eggs from egg banks.
Okay. So, yeah, I would love a greater data source about that because even with vitrification, I'm not seeing necessarily that it's equal, but now it's just through experience. So that's not research based.
Sorry, we have to clarify equal what to what.
Oh, so I think you're talking about frozen eggs versus frozen embryos. So the success of thawing a frozen egg and then having sperm to create embryos, and then the pregnancy rate with that versus having frozen embryos and then thawing those and then getting pregnant. Like, is it equal?
Yeah, they're the same.
That didn't used to be the case, correct? Because
in the past, right. So in the past, frozen was less. Now it's the same.
Frozen eggs were less before.
Yeah. And frozen embryos.
Yeah, because I remember.
Do you have the research for that? Because we would love to be able to share it on our show notes.
I would have to look it up. But there's
later for sure. That'd be really helpful for sure.
That would be really helpful in terms of women creating that, making the decision, right?
Or when they're younger, if they're, let's say they somehow came about their own AMH, they think they have PCOS. And so then they had their AMH tested and they find out they actually have extremely low AMH and they're maybe not married, they're not partnered. And they are thinking like they're just, they're really determined to have children one day if they're not in that place. Right. So, even
they can freeze their eggs.
Freezing their eggs, if it's just as effective as, because I used to say, oh no, it's probably better you get a donor sperm than and freeze with your eggs. And that's not the case. I just want to clear that, right? Like it's actually,
no, we're not.
That's outstanding. Okay. So, and I remember my own, the freezing process did change because I remember at one point, even just freezing embryos could be a problem when you thawed them. And then that got updated too at some point. Yeah. So I remember I did IVF number 1 and then they didn't thaw, but maybe the embryos themselves were bad, but anyway, so they didn't thaw. I was like, oh man, they have to do another. I was so devastated by it. I probably threw you some nasty emails about it and everything, but it was really down to the process of freezing. And then then they had changed, they updated it. And then the frozen embryos were, the freezing process for embryos was better. They didn't thaw. I mean, they thaw well now. So
yeah. Well, I was at the CFAS, the Canadian Fertility Andrology Society annual meeting in Halifax in the hurricane. And were you there? I didn't see you.
No, I did not
okay.
go.
So there was, so one of the presentations was showing, they were saying, across the board, it's about 98% viable thawed embryos now, right? Like for thawing embryos. I didn't get the stats for the eggs though, but it wasn't the same. So I have to, that's why I'm really curious about what research source that you have. So interesting. Anyway.
It's exciting nonetheless. I mean, even if she's seeing it clinically and then to see, bigger picture, it's fantastic. So going back to egg donation, is it easy? Like, is it easy to say, okay, my sister has told me, because I mean, not that this is the case right now, but back when I was trying to get pregnant, my one sister said, oh, I'll just carry your babies, Tanya, since you can't get pregnant. And then the other one's like, I'll donate my eggs. And I'm like, okay, well, I have choices. I'm blessed. Anyhow, so I didn't need to go that route. But I remember thinking, hey, what's the process if my sister's letting me use her eggs? So what then?
So it's unfortunately not very easy to find an egg donor. In the past, before 2004, we were allowed to compensate them financially for their egg donation. In 2004, the legislation changed, and now they're only allowed to be compensated for receivable expenses. And so before 2004, clinics would have a small pool of their own donors who we screened because they're all screened. So we screened them for infectious diseases and drugs of abuse. And then we would have a pool for the patients to choose from. Now, the patient may find their own egg donor. So, but again, it's not an easy process. So they may have a friend or a family member who may be willing to donate their eggs, but oftentimes in those cases, their friends are their similar age, older. So ideally, we prefer to have our egg donors in their 20s. So not many of our patients have access to either friends or family members in that age group. So what's developed is that there are now agencies, egg donor agencies, that recruit donors, and then our patients have to work with an egg donor agency and choose the donor through an egg donor agency.
So I went through an egg donor agency. At the time it was called Asian Egg Donation, because of course I would be trying to find someone that is within my cultural background, right? And the reason being too, because we're speaking to family and friends versus an unknown donor. And I find most of my own patients, when they go down that route, it is for someone that you don't know. And there's some benefits to that, right? Because, and if you do go down this route, you definitely have to have like a lawyer involved, because there's a lot of things that you don't think of that can get in the way that you won't even consider. I mean, this is such an emotional process to begin with, but, looking in terms of future and liability and all these other things, you really need a lawyer involved. In fact, I think it's mandatory. And if you do consider donor, you actually by law have to also seek a counselor to make sure that you can do this properly. What do you think, Timea?
Exactly. So all of our patients that use donor egg or even donor sperm, Health Canada mandates that they do receive counseling regarding that, the psychosocial implications specifically. And all agencies will have them sign a contract. And while legal advice is not mandated, I highly recommend it to all of my patients because the agencies is giving them a contract that obviously favors the agency, most likely. And so I urge all my patients to have a lawyer of their own review the contract and ensure that there's nothing in there to be concerned about before they sign it.
That's great. I didn't do that. I just went through the lawyer. So that's really great new advice to be able to tell people. Thank you.
This is so random, but the other thing I was saying to a patient the other day, and not everybody has a brother, but so she was, looking to get an egg donor, and she really wanted, to build her family and have some of her own genetics. And I said, consider using an egg donor and then her brother's sperm for one embryo. So she would have some of her own genetics, and then an egg donor with her husband's sperm. So that way she felt like, there was some of her own genetics there. And then of course there's the whole epigenetics where you're influencing what genes get turned on regardless. So anyhow, I just thought I would share that. And because people don't really, when you're building a family, you're so frozen and can't even believe that you're here, that sometimes you don't even know all the options or choices.
Yes. And I actually had a patient. She was a single woman in her 40s. And that's exactly what she did. She got a donor egg and her brother's sperm. And, they're a great, happy, big family. It's awesome.
Nice.
Yes, with known donors, the contracts are a little bit more complicated.
Yes.
So that also presents a bit of an extra step, I would say. However, it's been done and also highly effective. So, for example, in terms of success rates, egg donation, our pregnancy rates are usually 60 to 80%, closer to the 80% mark, versus a woman in her 40s, even with IVF, you're looking at 10 to 30% at most.
Yes. And so that said, and you hit the nail on the head, it's a percentage game. It's still not a guarantee, because people get so upset. They think, okay, now it's a done deal, like one IVF cycle with a donor and I'm done. And as you and I both know, it doesn't necessarily happen that way. I've seen it where, in fact, in my own personal case as well. So we did thankfully one round. I used fresh egg donor, and they did one cycle of IVF, but she hyperstimulated. She probably had PCOS. So a lot of it wasn't even viable. We had a lot of embryos. And back then we did shared cycles. So it would, help with the offsetting costs when you share this woman that's providing the eggs. And she had done like 5 cycles previously, something like that. And so she produced a lot. We had a lot of embryos. We did one transfer with 2 eggs. This is before PGTA testing. And we got pregnant, and it was a chemical pregnancy. So that was 2. And then the next round of frozen embryo transfer, they put in 2, did not get pregnant. And it wasn't until the 3rd round that we got pregnant with our baby Zoe. So that was 6 embryos. So it's not a guarantee. That's my point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I had one patient lately where I was at the hospital helping her breastfeed her newborn baby, and that baby was it was a big struggle. She had to go through multiple donor egg batches until she, and I always say it's like down to the egg and the sperm. And so you'd think, having these different egg donors, like they're in their 20s and that they would be perfect eggs, but it's not always the case. And she always thought as the mom that there was something wrong with her uterus, but clearly she persisted on and she had her baby. So with her husband's sperm, and it was like, wow, that was like, because you when you pay for, I guess, a group or like a guarantee, kind of like
the guarantee program.
Right. The guarantee program. Maybe tell us about that.
So just going back to what Mary was saying about what's called PGTA. So nowadays we can do 2 things before you even choose a donor. So one is screening for genes. So we know certain diseases are caused by certain genes. And so there's a panel now where we can check for 268 or 286, a large number of genes in the donors. And then if that donor comes up as, quote, a carrier, for example, of a certain disease, then if you're using your partner's sperm, for example, then your partner would also get tested, because then if they're both carriers of the same gene, then that baby would have a 25% chance of having the disease. So this is another new thing now that they're doing for egg donors and sperm donors as well. So that's before you even choose them. And then once you create the embryos, then we can actually check the embryos for all 46 chromosomes. So that's pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy, or aneuploidy meaning the chromosomes. Versus if you do identify a gene or a genetic disorder, we can also do pre-implantation genetic testing for this disease specifically. So that's one thing. I mean, this does add cost to the cycle because genetic testing is not covered by OHIP or any type of general insurance. So that brings me, hold on, let's talk about the cost. I forgot what you asked me earlier, but in terms of cost, this is another aspect that can be quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Surprising for patients to hear in terms of the cost range is anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 to have an egg donor cycle. So that may also disadvantage certain patients, right? If they're unable to afford that.
Right. But so this is where the fresh donor versus the frozen egg banking, I think there's a price differential there, right?
Yes. Frozen eggs, I believe, would be cheaper.
So, I mean, it's all very interesting. And again, with all this, it's not to raise fear or anxiety. It's really about providing you the information so that you can make the informed choice. And, unfortunately, there is cost involved. And how would you manage this? Is this a route that is viable for you? And as you spoke about this, Dr. Belej-Rak, like some people will then pursue donor eggs sooner rather than later if there is, because nobody has unlimited funds. Well, I'm not going to say nobody, but a lot of people, there will be financial constraints. So then it's like, how many, if any, do I do at all for IVF before I move on to egg donor? Right. Exactly.
Then in certain situations, we look at the financial contribution to the picture as well, and then make the decision based on all the factors involved.
Right. Yeah, I was saying, like, when I'm like, by the time this kid's born, I'm not going to even have enough money to buy clothes for this kid. Like, it's going to be naked for the first 5 years.
Clothing is expensive. No.
Yes.
They're so funny. Yeah, it's hard, even just all the steps through the fertility process. And so you have to be really driven to, and then there's this like maternal instinct, right? Like you're like, I'm not giving up no matter what. So, and I always talk about the guaranteed program. Like if
yes, that's what you were asking.
I just remembered. certain
clinics will have different packages for their egg donor cycles. It could be like a single package. Sometimes there's like a guaranteed live birth program where they give you as many cycles as are needed to have a baby. And if it doesn't work out, then a proportion of the funds get refunded. So different, but not every clinic offers the same packages. So it would depend on the clinic.
Right. And not every, and the parameters around, like you have to be admitted to it because you have to qualify, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There'll
be criteria. Yeah.
Right. So there's the criteria. So you need to check it out for yourself, what the criteria are for each clinic. And and if you're local, actually, I don't know how local you need to be, but there are support groups, because it's like, wow, that's really weird, right? To have this child. And so yes, epigenetically, listen, my kid is my kid, like that, hands down. But there is still that, like, it's, is there a community of people that you can go towards that kind of gets where you're at, your mindset, and how to navigate this world with this child that is created in this way, which is beautiful. But it's like, it would be kind of cool to have support. So I know, what's it called? Extra, I believe. There's a egg donation support group that's around and Toronto based. And so we'll put that in the show notes for those that are interested. So whether you're considering, or if you're in midstream, in the waiting game, or if you're pregnant, or even if you've already have this child, it's a community that's for life. And so I think that's a great network of people I know that they even have like family, at least prior to the pandemic, they had like family picnics where these families would go. So it's just quite lovely. I hadn't participated yet because I hadn't come out yet.
Right. Question. And you get so personal, and thank you for that, Mary, because I know it takes it's a big deal, even though we're very unfiltered. Was there a certain age you told Zoe, or do you recommend?
That's a really, really great question. I fully believe in the actual Jan Silverman, excellent fertility counselor, she said, even with adoptions, the idea is to tell them as soon as possible to normalize it. So it's not like a thing hanging over one's head for yourself or for the others. So right from birth, she knew, like she didn't, it's like, do what's age appropriate. Well, at first she knew that she came like, you know, a lovely lady, helped and donated an egg, and she helped us. My mommy's Philippine tubes were broken. That's what she knew. And I had to have surgery, and here's a doctor who helped. And, you know, she was frozen, and she's like, but mommy, why did you put me in the freezer? Like, you know, like you had to navigate all these weird things. But at the end of the day, she knows. And so even now, like she's 10 years old, and she's like, mommy, you're my mommy, right? I'm like, yes, of course I'm your mommy. She's like, yeah, I'm your mommy. Yeah. And plus I had a C-section. So she sees the scar where she came out of, right? So it's real. Yeah. So there's nothing weird about it at all. Yeah.
I think telling from a young age is everything I've ever read, because then it normalizes it, and, you know, they just can accept it. And as you're saying, like the explanation changes. I even knew I was going to be open about eventually, because to me, I held it as a secret that I even did IVF. Like I was just like, how do I even like share this? And even being a contributing author for Dr. Belej-Rak's book, Embrace Your Fertility, I wasn't open about my chapter. I was like the story before hers. Yeah. A practical guide to empowering your fertility. Yeah. So I was like, you know what, like I can't be open about it. But then I think in the revamped version, I was like, you know what, let's just be open. Because I want people to be empowered and know decision, like, you know, like have their decisions and know that sometimes, you know, you have to go this route. And I told my son, because of that book, that he was made in a dish. I was like, I don't know how to explain this.
Made in a dish.
So he said to me recently, he's like, Mom, he's like, you know, when you told me that, I really thought that I was made from the cells of a dish. I didn't understand that I was actually, you know, it was your eggs, daddy's sperm. And like, it's like, he was so confused.
Okay,
my daughter was conceived with IVF as well. So so all three of us had our fertility journeys.
Yes.
And was your daughter also, did you tell her right from the get-go as well?
Yes.
Yeah. And there are great benefits. And you know, one of the things that Jan Silverman said was, well, if you don't disclose, what happens when it actually comes out?
Right. Because there's ancestry now. There's ancestry. There's, you know, you can do your spit swab, spit in a tube and then send it away to like 23andme.com and then find out you have all these relatives. And if you do that, I mean, there's patients who I've had who have said that they discovered they have a lot of siblings because maybe in this one circumstance that their father had mumps when he was a child. And so then that mom had to use a sperm donor and she didn't know. And so then she was actually quite open to have siblings, but like it's not all situations are that easy.
Thank you for sharing that. And so that I can tell everyone that there is an egg donation registry that you can sign up for. I haven't done it yet, but technically, well, I will, because I had the conversation with my daughter already. I said, you know, there is a possibility that you may have, because she already donated 5 times prior to me. And I know she's a known proven donor, which means that she already allowed for pregnancies. I don't know about the live birth rates, right? But I did know that she was proven in terms that she got pregnant, right?
Like she'll be like, yay.
Yeah. Siblings. She's still like, to this day, like, Mom, I'm like, I have a surprise for you. You're pregnant. I'm like, no, honey, I'm not. So it's like, yes, that would be great. And you know, the first sister is not doing it enough.
Yeah. So we make babies.
Even though it's may come across as a complicated process, what I want to share with everyone is that it's we walk you through it, and so we make the process easy and simple, and provide you with all the guidance that you would need to create a family if this is the decision that you make. So generally speaking, it takes about 3 to 6 months to go through the process.
And you are amazing because like in all steps of my fertility journey, because I remember being there with my spouse and you sitting there and talking us through it and us talking about you after and saying that was like the coolest doctor with the best bedside manner. And really, truly, honestly, it's like the best thing ever to go through this journey and then have an amazing doctor helping you along the way. So thank you,
Oh,
again.
and this is where the integration is so key. I mean, we talk about how it takes a village to raise a child, but we know in our field, it's like, no, it actually takes a village to create the baby. So we're happy to be part of the community, no matter how you conceive, right? Life, whether it's natural to full on IVF to like donor or surrogacy, like we see it all. And we're always there. And that's why we're here today for you, right?
Well, that's what made me go into fertility. So I went into obstetrics because I wanted to deliver babies. And then when we did a rotation during our residency of our fertility rotation, I was like, holy, how cool is this? Now I can help create them.
Yes. So, and thank you for it.
Yes, thank you.
Some more training and here I am.
Well, no, I love that we are collaborating and we're speaking to this as one medicine. I'll never forget it. Dr. Paul Magarelli out of the US, he's an REI in Colorado, and he said, like instead of integrative medicine, we should just call it one medicine, because that's what this is. You're treating one whole person, and we need to be able to integrate all types of systems to have that whole system care.
Well,
right?
That's why in the book, that's what I did with the book is there's the 8 chapters, and the chapters are all preceded by patient stories that conceived with that particular method. And then, so we have a chapter from Dr. Wyde on naturopathy, and there's one on traditional Chinese medicine. We have a counselor. We have a mind-body chapter. We have a chapter on sperm donation, egg donation, and adoption as well. So,
and in your chapter,
and the medical,
which is
treatment.
Yes,
the medical. Don't forget that piece. Yeah. So,
but you got all 8. So good for you.
Yes. No, it's awesome. I'm just thinking, wait a minute, why wasn't I in the book? But that's okay. I'm not being offended.
I don't think we
didn't know you at that point,
I know.
or you would have been 100%. Yes,
Absolutely.
That's okay. All right. Well, is there any last thing that you want to say? Like if we're going to recap and talk about the takeaways of this talk, do you want to sum it up, Dr. Belej-Rak?
Don't give up. But seriously, is to remember that there are different options available, many, many, many different options available. And egg donation may not be an option that you would have thought of right off the bat. However, it is highly, highly, highly effective and very helpful for our patients. So, I think that's just the takeaway is that keep an open mind. And even if it's not something that you would have considered, you may change your mind.
Okay, so I'm going to have to add to this because you know what? All 3 of us are type A's. So we're like, yeah, don't give up. Yeah, that's right. We don't give up. Okay. But I'm actually going to also add in a non-type A version of myself and say, it's okay to give up.
There's that too. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the chapters in the book is about, I love the title of it. It's called Becoming a Family Again. And so it's about a couple that went through the fertility journey and they did not end up with a baby. However, they felt like a family as well.
Well, they're not like a family. They are family.
They are family.
Well, yes, that's great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to end off this episode on a high note. And so it doesn't really matter what, and it's, so I think in a nutshell, it's just about bracing who you are and it's not being defined by how family looks like.
Yes.
And that's it.
Beautiful.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Beautiful. You're beautiful. Tanya's beautiful. We're all loved here.
Thanks, Dr. Belej-Rak.
Thank you so much, ladies. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
We were getting off the call, but then we're talking about siblings and the possibility of siblings when you have donor conceived either eggs or sperm. And, you were speaking to your story. So tell us about.
Yeah. So I was just saying, how cool would it be for Zoe if you went on the egg donation registry to find siblings for Zoe? Because knowing who Zoe is, she's like a passionate little human and she would love to hear that she has siblings. And I was just sharing my experience meeting my sister, Mary, who's my half sister. So same dad, she was given up for adoption because my dad conceived her when he was fresh out of high school, I think. And so she was shipped off to a nunnery, and then she was adopted by this lovely Catholic family. And then she reached out to my dad at 16 I was 16 and I got to meet her, and it was one of the coolest things I'll just never forget. Like, she was 10 years or almost 10 years older than me, and just all the similarities and discovering, the resemblances and the connections. And then we actually both ended up conceiving children at the same age. So 35 and 30, almost 9, and having polycystic ovary syndrome. So having her support me through my fertility journey and the miscarriages and the heavy bleeds and all that kind of stuff. So it was like the coolest thing ever to just connect with like another human who's just like you. And it was just, she was adopted. And so like discovering people who are genetically similar to you, your siblings, it's a like amazing thing. So I just was sharing that off camera. I'm like, you got to do it, Mary.
No, I will. I just haven't gotten around to it, and there is time.
Sure.
And
of course, there's lots of time.
For sure.
I thought I would just share that. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. And I'm just thinking, I was like, oh, wait a minute, your sister Mary is 10 years old. That's like me. But I'm your Asian sister. You
are my Asian sister. That's right. Totally.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
First.